He walked into the police station like a nobody, disrespected, spat on, treated like trash. But just minutes later, the very same men stood frozen in silence when they found out who he really was. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a punch straight to the gut of a broken system. Before we dive into the story, here's a quick question for you. What kind of city do you think this happened in? A big, noisy metropolis, or a quiet little town where nothing ever seems to change? Drop your guess in the comments below. And if this kind of powerful story moves you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real, gripping tales like this one. Alright, let's get into it. It was a sweltering August morning in the town of Maple Grove, Georgia. The sun had just risen above the tall pine trees, casting golden beams across the nearly empty main street. Malcolm Pierce, newly appointed chief of police for Maple Grove, stepped out of his beat-up old car. He wasn't in uniform, just a plain plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. No badge, no name tag, and that was entirely by design. He didn't want to be greeted with polished smiles or carefully rehearsed welcome. Malcolm wanted to see the department as it really was, unfiltered, unprepared. He knew from experience. A firm handshake tells you nothing about the truth buried inside an organization. He had grown up in a rough neighborhood where cops were feared, not trusted, and after 25 years in law enforcement, confronting racism, calling out corruption from within, Malcolm understood one thing clearly. If you want to fix a system, you have to see the rot for yourself. In front of him stood an old red brick building, the headquarters of the Maple Grove Police Department. The parking lot was scattered with patrol cars. A few officers were gathered in loose groups, chatting beside a mobile coffee stand. Malcolm took a long breath in. No one noticed him. That, he thought, was exactly what he needed. He walked slowly toward the side entrance, the one staff usually used during shift changes, a paper coffee cup in one hand, his step steady. The hot air swirled around the benches, carrying with it the faint smell of burnt cigarettes and stale donuts. And in that moment, standing there on the threshold, he knew. He was exactly where he was meant to be, in a place that needed change, and he was ready to bring it, with his own eyes, his own ears, and his own voice. Malcolm walked slowly across the parking lot, the heat rolling off the blacktop like waves off a griddle. Rows of patrol cars sat at odd angles under the harsh morning sun. The air was thick with the smell of melting plastic, cigarette smoke, and a faint trace of engine oil. The scent of a police station long forgotten by time. His sneakers made dry, hollow taps against the concrete, each step echoing in the stillness. He entered through the side hallway, the kind used by clerks and junior officers, not people in charge. Faded posters peeled off the walls. Old portraits of retired officers hung crooked and dusty. Overhead, flickering fluorescent lights cast a cold, ghostly white across the corridor. Somewhere in the distance, a lone phone rang. Keystrokes clicked in steady rhythm, and someone laughed. A short, hollow sound, like a joke nobody really found funny anymore. Malcolm passed the break room, heading toward the main office area, when a voice rang out. Sharp, mocking like a knife slicing through quiet. "Hey, you!" He turned. A white officer with a buzz cut and a broad frame was striding toward him, a smug grin stretched across his face. The name on his chest read, Officer Brad Whitaker. "This ain't no soup kitchen, pal," Brad sneered. "If you're looking for a place to cool off, try around back. We're not handing out free lunches." Behind Brad, 3 or 4 officers leaned casually against the wall, coffee cups in hand, watching with amused eyes. One nudged the other and let out a low snicker, like they were watching a live comedy sketch. Malcolm pressed his lips together. His heartbeat picked up, but his face stayed calm. "I was just," he began. Brad cut him off, louder now. "You didn't hear me. I said get the hell out of here. This is a workplace for people with badges, ranks, not bums wandering in off the street." The room seemed to hold its breath. The ceiling fan clacked overhead. The laughter dimmed. A chill ran through the hallway. Not from the air, but from the sudden shift in tension. Malcolm knew that feeling well. He had lived it his whole life. Judged by color, by clothes, by presence. Not for who he was, but for who they assumed he wasn't. Then Brad stepped in. Too close, inches away now. "You deaf old man," he growled. And then, spit, a warm, wet glob hit Malcolm's cheek and slid down toward his collar. It stung. Not just the skin, but something deeper. The stink of saliva mixed with sweat and dust and years of disrespect. Laughter exploded behind Brad. Someone slapped a table. Another whistled low. The hallway had turned into a cruel stage, and Malcolm was the center of the act. But he didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, didn't return the insult. Instead, he calmly pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and began wiping his face, slow, steady, as if he were dusting off his glasses instead of cleaning spit from a racist's attack. "This how you greet people around here?" His voice was low, steady, and unmistakably firm. Brad chuckled, but something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, maybe even doubt. Malcolm said nothing more. He turned, shoulders square, and walked down the hallway without another glance. He was headed to the main briefing room, where in just a few minutes everyone in that building would come face to face with the truth they'd never forget. The main briefing room of the Maple Grove Police Department sat at the end of a long ground-floor hallway, a square-shaped room lit by harsh fluorescent lights, filled with U-shaped wooden tables and a whiteboard smudged with faded dry erase markers. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with casual chatter. A few officers leaned against the walls, coffee in hand, tossing around pointless jokes and morning banter. The air was thick with the familiar blend of stale coffee, paper files, and industrial floor cleaner, the tired scent of a place long stuck in its ways. Brad Whitaker lounged comfortably in the corner, one leg propped up on an empty chair, a smug grin still lingering from his earlier performance with the so-called drifter. The officers nearby chuckled quietly, unaware that the moment they were laughing about would soon come back to haunt them. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life. "All personnel, please report to the briefing room. Emergency meeting starting now." The side door creaked open. No one paid much attention at first, just another man in a wrinkled shirt, faded jeans, and dust-covered sneakers. But then, heads began to turn. Malcolm didn't just enter the room. He walked straight to the podium, holding a folder sealed with the department's official crest. The chatter began to die, one voice at a time. Brad blinked, then slowly sat up straighter. A chill rippled through the room like cold air from an open window. Just then, Captain Monica Hayes, head of personnel, stood and cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our new Chief of Police, Malcolm Pierce." Effective immediately. Silence fell like a thunderclap. It was as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room. Brad sat frozen. His jaw dropped, but no sound came out. The laughter from earlier evaporated into a thick cloud of disbelief and shame. Malcolm stepped forward, his eyes scanning every face in the room. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I came here this morning not as your leader, but as a man who needed to see the truth." The room was dead silent. Every eye was locked on Malcolm. The same man who, just minutes earlier, had been mistaken for a drifter. Now he stood before them, calm, composed, and carrying the highest authority in the entire department. Malcolm placed the folder on the wooden podium, his gaze sweeping slowly across the room. He saw it all in their faces: confusion, embarrassment, surprise, and fear. Then he spoke, his voice deep and steady, ringing through the room like a bell. "This morning I walked into this building without a badge, no uniform, no introduction. I came with only one thing: my eyes. I didn't want warm welcomes. I didn't need polite smiles. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered, and I found it." He paused. His eyes landed directly on Brad Whitaker. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I saw an officer spit in a man's face because he believed that man was beneath him. I saw laughter, applause, nods of agreement, as if that behavior was just another day at the office. And if that's what's normal here, then the culture of this place is rotten to its core." No one moved. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. I've spent my entire career fighting injustice, not just in the streets but inside rooms just like this one. I've gone toe-to-toe with men in uniform who never understood the meaning of the badge they wore. And I will not allow that to continue in Maple Grove. Malcolm stepped away from the podium. He walked slowly toward the group of officers, heads lowered now in shame. He stopped right in front of Brad. Officer Whitaker. Brad flinched. His face flushed red, lips trembling. When you spit in my face, you didn't just insult a man, you disgraced this profession. You spit on the trust our community gave us. Malcolm turned back to the room. That wasn't a moment of poor judgment, that was a symptom of a toxic culture. A culture that tolerates bullying, racism, and disrespect. As of today, that culture ends. He returned to the podium, his tone now cold and sharp as steel. Effective immediately, Officer Brad Whitaker is suspended pending internal investigation. And let me be clear, this is not the end of accountability. This is the beginning of change. A small gasp echoed from the back of the room. Several officers who had laughed before now looked at Malcolm with something different in their eyes. Respect. He looked each one of them in the face. I didn't come here to be your friend. I came to do what's right, and if you're not ready for change, the exit's right behind you. No one moved. 3 months after that defining meeting, the atmosphere inside the Maple Grove Police Department felt completely different. The mocking laughter was gone. The backhanded shoulder slaps had stopped. In their place were quiet nods of respect, short but sincere conversations between officers who once spoke only in sarcasm. Malcolm Pierce still made his rounds every morning, not to inspect, but to be seen. To remind everyone that real change doesn't come from memos or slogans. It comes from showing up, every single day. Some of the veteran officers, including Brad Whitaker, put in for transfers or early retirement. No reasons were given, but nobody needed an explanation. Under Malcolm's leadership, there was no longer room for favoritism, cover-ups, or quiet prejudice. In their place, a new wave of carefully selected recruits began arriving. Young men and women with sharp eyes and eager hearts. Malcolm made a point to personally attend their first training sessions, not to lecture them on law and order, but to talk about responsibility, dignity, and trust. And that change, it didn't stay locked inside the station walls. Out on the streets of Maple Grove, where people had once crossed to the other side at the sight of a patrol car, something was shifting. An elderly woman selling produce at the market smiled at an officer on foot patrol, something she hadn't done in years. A young black man, once wrongly detained for looking suspicious, walked into the station on his own to ask about joining the force. Little conversations, careful handshakes, a nod exchanged on a quiet sidewalk. Bit by bit, trust was returning. Malcolm knew the road ahead would still be long. Bias doesn't disappear overnight. But each firm step forward, each decision to hold the line, was a small piece in a much larger picture of justice, and for the first time in many years, Malcolm felt it. He wasn't just changing a police department. The department was learning how to change with him. That afternoon, a light rain began to fall. Droplets tapped gently against the police station's awning, streaking down the wide front windows like delicate brushstrokes. Malcolm Pierce stood by the glass, a half-empty cup of cold coffee in hand. He was just about to pack up after a long, draining day of meetings when a soft knock came at the door. Captain Monica Hayes peeked her head in. "Chief," she said quietly, "there's a young boy asking to see you," he said. "He has some questions." Malcolm raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Send him in." The door opened slowly. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, stepped in. He was small and thin, wearing a rain-soaked grey hoodie. His curly hair clung to his forehead, and his wide, dark eyes looked up at Malcolm with a mix of curiosity and caution. "My name's Malik," the boy said, barely above a whisper. "Are you really the police chief?" Malcolm smiled and gave a gentle nod. "That's right, kid. I'm Malcolm Pierce, chief of police here in Maple Grove." Malik nodded slowly. Then after a pause, his voice came again, soft, like wind slipping through a crack in the window. "My dad says Cops don't care about people like us. He says when we're in trouble, nobody comes. Malcolm knelt down so they were eye to eye, his face softening in a way few people ever got to see. I understand why your dad feels that way, he said. A lot of unfair things have happened. I was once a kid just like you, hearing the same things, wondering if anyone would ever show up for me. Malik bit his lip, eyes searching. But is it different now? He asked quietly. Malcolm reached out and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I can't change the past, he said, his voice deep but warm. But I'm doing everything I can to change the future. I'm here to listen, to fix what's broken, and to make sure that if one day you need help, someone will be there for you. Malik looked up. A tiny spark of hope flickered in his eyes, and then a smile. Small, but real. Enough to make Malcolm's heart tighten in his chest. So, if my friend's getting bullied, can I come talk to you? The boy asked. Malcolm nodded without hesitation. Any time. About anything. Outside, the rain had stopped. Golden light began peeking through the clouds, casting reflections on the damp pavement. Malik walked out of the office with a lighter step than when he came in, and Malcolm stood by the door watching him go, feeling for the first time in a long while like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. In that quiet moment, he knew. Every fight, every pushback, every sacrifice, it was all worth it for that boy, for the others like him, and for the future he still believed was possible. A full year had passed since Malcolm Pierce first walked into the Maple Grove Police Department, wearing scuffed sneakers and a simple shirt. The small town still looked the same from the outside, quiet, familiar. But on the inside, something had changed. Bit by bit, moment by moment. Malcolm never promised overnight transformation. There were no banners, no press conferences. Instead, he started small, restructuring the hiring process, implementing mandatory training on unconscious bias and community engagement, hosting open forums where residents could speak and be heard. Many were skeptical. They'd heard words like that before and watched them fade like slogans on a weathered wall. But Malcolm was different. He showed up at the farmers' market every weekend, chatting with vendors like old friends. He visited schools, shook hands with teachers, and listened to student stories. He wasn't just the police chief. He was part of the community. Inside the department, the culture began to shift. Officers who once made snide jokes now stayed quiet. Some chose to leave, not because they were pushed, but because they knew they no longer belonged. And with each departure came room for someone better, new recruits who brought with them kindness, integrity, and the belief that policing could be a force for good. As for Brad Whitaker, the officer who had once spit in Malcolm's face, he was investigated, suspended, and eventually resigned. His old file revealed years of complaints long ignored, but under Malcolm, no files stayed buried. No wrongdoing stayed hidden. One evening, as golden streetlights lit the tree-lined road outside, Malcolm stood in the main hallway of the station. A group of young officers passed by, laughing, not cruelly, but easily. Genuinely. No one had to say it out loud. He could feel it. The air had changed. A year wasn't enough to erase the scars of the past, but it was enough to plant a seed, and that seed was growing in people who once doubted, once hurt, and now slowly began to believe again. Malcolm smiled. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but now he wasn't walking it alone. He hadn't just changed a police department. He had helped restart something far more powerful. He had helped rebuild trust. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I've poured a lot of time, heart, and soul into creating emotional stories like this one, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for joining me on this journey.